Good morning and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Maarit Jaakkola, Editor-in-Chief of Nord Media Network and Co-Director of Nordicom. This is the first part of our series of morning webinars presenting new Nordic media research. Nord Media Network is a digital platform for researchers interested in media research run by Nordicom at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And our mission is to bring together Nordic researchers in the field of media and communication. And webinars presenting new studies is an excellent way of doing that. The idea of these webinars is very simple: to present special issues published by Nordic scientific journals. Special issues are thematic entities that are put together to present studies of a topical, often an emerging research issue. And special issues collect researchers looking at the same direction, and they have the potential to pave way for new research agendas. And that's why they are very special. At Nord Media Network, we wanted to continue with the concept of low threshold webinars that we have been carrying on and that we have introduced during the past years. We thus want to offer concise sessions where scholars and everyone interested in the newest Nordic studies can keep up with the research that is being continuously published in the 5 countries: Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Today, we start with a topic that is being addressed and will be addressed in all the Nordic countries in multiple ways. But this special issue is among the pioneering ones. The special issue of the Danish journal MedieKultur is called The Communicative Dynamics of AI in Datafied Societies. It's edited by Martina S. Manke from Roskilde University and Emma Christensen from the same university. Martina will first present the whole issue. Martina is an associate professor at the Faculty of Communication and Arts and at Roskilde University, and also the chair of the board of the Association for Media and Communication Researchers in Denmark, SMED. Martina is also the journal manager of, has been working along with MedieKultur. After Martina, the word will be passed on to one of the authors of the special issue, Oliver Driesens from the University of Copenhagen. And after that, the study will be briefly commented by Professor Amanda Lagerqvist from Uppsala University. So, and at the end, we will have a very short Q&A. And you can write questions in the chat box all the time if you wish. So to begin with, I'll give the screen to Martina. Please, Martina Manke.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. And I can also add that if you have interesting articles or something you want to share, feel free to do so in the chat, because as I said, it's also interesting for us to learn about each other's work. Additionally, towards being at Roskilde University, I'm actually a guest professor in Thailand right now at Chiang Mai University. So my own research has also been focused on what we generally call the global south. And I thought it was extremely interesting to also get that insight here, how ChatGPT is being used or AI is being used. But before maybe we can also talk a little bit about that, I would like to introduce the special issue. And the authors, so you can just, when I say your name, you can just say hi, because it's always nice to see a picture, because we usually only email, we don't ever talk to each other. So I think it's really nice to see each other. And yeah, it's been a special issue I did together with Emma. We both became interested in a project we were working together, and where ChatGPT was launched, and we thought, oh, we want to do an issue on this. And I mean, how it is in academia 2 years later, here we are with the issue. So it's actually things have changed a lot over the time, and that's also the context you have to see with regards to these papers, even though we had a pretty quick turnaround about a year with double-blind review, but still, of course, the field is evolving. In the introduction, for those of you who are interested, we're trying to basically summarize what's at stake, and we're trying to summarize this from a communication perspective. Because the question is, why, as communication scholars or communication and media scholars, why do we need to even engage in the topic of AI? Shouldn't that be a technical topic, or shouldn't it be a different type of topic? But I think the interesting part is here that AI or chatbot have started to, what we would say, communicate. And that's what we're trying to talk about in the introduction. And then it also comes in the first article by Amanda Lehrquist, Yearning for You, which also it goes into the questions, what happens if AI becomes some sort of conscious? And it's not to make it like this very binary distinctions between human consciousness and machine consciousness, but again, taking a communication perspective that we're having a relationship with a machine, and that we sometimes ask ourselves, is somebody at home at this machine? What I really like about this article, and I really urge you to all read it, is this existential media perspective, which I heard about it, but I wasn't so aware of it before. And for me, it's been a really eye-opener, and I definitely will use it with some of my students because it makes you think in a different way. The next article is by Olivier and Magda, and he will actually present his article, so I'm just going to jump right over it. But it will talk a little bit about generative AI policies and then the blind spots in these policies. And an interesting part, maybe a little teaser I can give you, is that the environment is not a big issue in these policies, but there's rather other issues at stake, and we can probably talk about those afterwards. The next article from Laura Sunia and Dagmar Hoffmann, I have seen her, yes, is called From AI Imaginaries to AI Literacy. And this gives a really interesting perspective on migrants in Germany and how they basically navigate this whole digital media technology, or the sphere of digital media technology. So it's not just about AI, but it's more, and that's what I really like about the study, it takes a broader approach towards it, where AI becomes one part of digital media technology, and it looks at especially how migrants experience using these technologies and how they experience working with them in an everyday perspective. The next one is Christopher Bakker. I have not seen him here, but it's about the absent algorithm. It takes an organizational perspective, and it asks why at some point you wouldn't talk about algorithms, or you wouldn't talk about AI. I think for many companies, it's somehow a branding exercise to say we're also working with AI, we're also working with algorithms. But Christopher, he's actually analyzed some social media, some social enterprise media webinars, and also other material, and kind of find out why wouldn't you talk about it. And the interesting part is here that AI becomes some sort of performative actor. And a lot of organizations would not want that. They would say, but I'm in control. And here Christopher really talks about what is actually when AI makes decision, who then is making the decision if we actually put it on AI. So that is interesting, why at some point you wouldn't talk about the algorithm. The next one is about DALL-E. I also really enjoyed reading this article. And it generates different images via AI, and it makes different prompts of how then the AI basically represents different professions in India. And I think when you just look at the pictures, it wouldn't be so surprising. I think a lot of them is like our everyday perceptions of India and the professions. But when you actually read the analysis, you can see that there's certain symbols, for example, the dress, that makes it more particular in in a certain aspect. And I think that's why it's interesting to not just look at the pictures, but actually to read the article, because you really get new knowledge about what are the cues to look at in the images, and especially in the AI-generated images. The next article is called Knowledge Production and Epistemic Injustices, and that I can recommend. I think a lot of people said about learning and higher education, and I think it's really a good read for students to make them aware of the biases when we use AI for literature search. I think we somehow, on a general level, it's clear that AI is biased, and it's clear that when we search literature with AI, that we have to be aware of the bias. But I think in this article, it actually exemplifies what the bias is and also how you can go around it. So they basically take their own experience with searching for literature, and then they analyze and make some statements about how we can actually work with this. So I think this is an excellent paper for students to read, and also for students that now will probably be using AI for literature search. And then the next article is called To Use or Not to Use Artificial Intelligence. That is a question that goes into the use of AI with strategic communication professionals. And that is basically what Emma had said in the beginning a bit, that now with ChatGPT, a lot of people are using it, that I can also see in my own studies here in Thailand. That especially communication professionals find it as an easy tool to use in their communication. But then the question, there's a lot of ethical questions and a lot of professional questions around it. So at what point is it actually helpful for me to use it as a communication professional? And at what point should I leave it? So that is a study that actually digs deeper into that question. And then we have a Danish article by Jesper, who takes a Lumen perspective on AI. So those of you who read Danish. And then we had talked about the open section, where it's about Disney movies. And I find that study actually very positive, that it seems like the typical gender stereotypes in Disney movies are not as prevalent any longer than they used to be. And we also have a book review, The Sounds of Spectacles of Football. So that is basically the overall special issue, but we chose to talk about the use of AI in higher education, because we thought that's probably of interest to the most of us. And that's why I just gave it to Olivier, who can present the study.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Also, thanks to Amanda for the comment already. I'll quickly load up my slides. And sorry. Maybe in the meantime, I should say, in contrast to several of you, I'm not education expert. My research is in media and social change. So I collaborated with a colleague from the section of education, but she's on leave, so she cannot attend today. So I'll be presenting the paper alone. No, sorry, wrong one. Okay, does this work? Yeah, good. Thank you. So the article is entitled Danish University Policies on Generative AI, Problems, Assumptions, and Sustainability Blind Spots. And our interest was piqued in this topic at the time of its launch, or at the time of the launch of ChatGPT-3 in November 2022, when soon after, of course, universities were having exams. December, January, and suddenly there was this chatbot that could write papers, answer all kinds of questions. So we noticed quite a bit of panic almost amongst universities, which then soon after were translated into all kinds of bans to prevent supposed cheating, both in Denmark but also in other countries of course. At the same time, these fears, perhaps you could say, were also countered by other concerns, concerns coming from industry, employers, politics, that assumed that this technology would not go away, that it was very important, and so that graduates of universities should also master the skills to use these tools. They need prompt engineering skills, etc. But there's a third area of concerns surrounding this. People expressing that, well, ChatGPT perhaps doesn't really understand what is happening or what it is talking about. So should we use it in education when a tool doesn't really understand its own output? What about data that have been used to train these models? Some companies and also newspapers like the Times then sued OpenAI for violating copyright, etc. While also questions in terms of the data quality and the bias reproduced through AI and large language models became a topic of wide concern, and which also is addressed in the paper on DALL-E in this issue. Then further, other concerns focus on the labor that went into making this system. Who is actually doing the work and under which circumstances? And some reports were not so positive, let's say, found that Kenyan workers were screening content that included bestiality, pedophile content, etc., for just 2 hours. $2 per hour, not receiving any psychological support either. And then finally, there's a whole range of concerns in terms of the environment, the mining of resources to build the servers, the enormous amounts of electricity and also water that are needed while training and then running the systems. And all these concerns, I use here examples from media, but of course also academic research focuses on these very same issues. So combined, we were interested in which kinds of concerns, which of these different types of concerns then were translated into the policies and guidelines that Danish universities developed to manage the use or non-use perhaps of generative AI. And we believe this is relevant because it gives insight into which kind of dimensions are valued, but also then how institutions and their staff and students approach and possibly use large language models. Does this approach lean towards seeing these technologies as neutral tools that can solve problems, or are they approached as technologies embedded in particular political economy, ecology, and unequal societies? And what we found here was that in Denmark, the approaches mostly leaned towards the former approach, but we argue that the standard for responsible and sustainable use of generative AI, or AI in general, should be the latter. How we analyzed this was by using Bakki's "what's the problem represented to be" approach, which is an often used methodology to analyze policy. So here, this approach focuses on the interrogation of the ways that policy suggests how problems, so-called problems, exist in the world, and to how such representations of problems then affect how society is governed. So you could say that it starts from the policy as a solution, asking then, what is the concern, what is the problematization that informed this proposed solution? So in that sense, we could also say that policies then unavoidably constitute what counts as a problem. In practice then, this means shifting our attention away from the policies as such towards critiquing the problematizations indeed. What do these problem representations conceive of as needing fixing? Which dimensions of the issue are taken into account and which haven't been? Which ones are neglected or invisible? And which assumptions then inform such decisions? Of course, it was impossible to focus or to have a detailed analysis of all 6 questions in our paper. We focused mostly on 1, 2, 4, and 5. The data used were the policies and guidelines of 8 Danish universities that were mostly publicly available, some on the intranet, which we still managed to access. In terms of the quantity of information and how extensive these policies are, we noticed stark differences, where University of Copenhagen, for example, has extensive and many pages and explainers, while for the Southern Denmark University, for example, this was limited to 1 page, while ITU had no publicly available information, just a newsletter by the dean on its use. Here is an example of how this looks like, for example, for CBS. So with general guidelines, and then what this means for students, etc. So we looked at these and tried to see which kind of concerns and problems were inscribed in those. In terms of the introduction of these policies, we noticed that this generally follows the pattern observed also in other countries, with a first phase of waiting, where negotiations were happening behind the scenes, leading then to the introductions of mostly bans in January, February 2023, so a few months after the introduction of ChatGPT 3. ITU didn't announce any bans and left it up to the individual teachers. The third phase of embracing means that the bans are mostly done away with, or at least relaxed and replaced by guidelines instead on the proper use of large language models. So mentioning it as a source or mentioning in exam papers how it has been used by students. In the data then, or in the policies, we noticed 3 key concerns expressed by these policies. And the first one is, of course, exam or assessment integrity, which also explains why many of these policies in university websites have been included in exam regulation or in exam sections of the university websites. So of course, since most exams assess the knowledge or the body of knowledge and some skills of students, there was concern that originality or authenticity became irrelevant when machines could produce certain outcomes instead of the students. Because these technologies can also be seen as radically democratized technologies for cheating, you could say. Before there were professionals who could write papers and dissertations, but now everyone has easy and also free access to them. In terms of assumptions behind this, it also means, of course, that then originality or authenticity imply the exclusion of certain tools. Although an alternative understanding could, of course, be that knowledge today often involves technological mediation and collaboration. So perhaps we should just rethink what counts as originality or as relevant for exam submission. Another assumption that informs then the embracing of the technology and loosening some of the exam policies is the acceptance of the inevitability of generative AI and the pressure from employers and politicians to deliver graduates who can work with generative AI. In terms of its effects, which is question 5, of course, in the beginning, we could say that these policies and guidelines were much more anticipatory and perhaps preventive rather than necessarily corrective of a problematic situation, because there was not that much information available about how many students actually cheated or at least used generative AI for their exams and other work. So you could say that these policies also express a certain kind of distrust towards students, but at the same time, by doing so, also co-constitute the problem of large language models as cheating tools by presenting and framing them through these policies. The second key concern is about legal questions, legality around data, and especially what happens with data that we enter as prompts. Will that be used as training data or not? And this then led University of Copenhagen and Southern Denmark University, it's a mouthful, to not approve staff or not recommend the use of OpenAI for these reasons, and also added that staff cannot require students to use it. DTU and CBS share these concerns, but went a step further by then signing exclusive contracts with Microsoft's Copilot. So students and staff at these institutions can only rely on Copilot and no other technologies. What is made invisible then, or what is perhaps lacking in these policies around legality of data, is that they don't go that much beyond questions around GDPR, copyright, etc., and overlook the more fundamental questions that are raised by concepts such as surveillance capitalism and data colonialism. For example, they don't really refer to the business models, the systematic data extraction that fuels AI or generative AI, nor the deeply unequal power relations that this large-scale deployment of datafication and AI entails. So in effect, we could say that the policies accept the status quo and adjust the university's operations to enable and smoothen its participation in what is understood as an inevitable process of innovation and technology-driven development. This brings me to the last key concern, which is veracity, and basically deals with questions around errors and biases, for which many of the policies also warn. So students and staff are alerted to the fact that some of the output might not be correct, truthful, or that it can also be biased. At the same time, there still is no reason for discouraging or banning the use of these technologies. And then this relates to an implied solution in the policies, namely critical literacy and source critique. Both skills that are supposed to be acquired or further improved through courses designed around the use of generative AI. So also here at the University of Copenhagen, we see many of these kinds of courses. Ultimately, then, we think that this fate in the user's critical skills development puts too great an onus on the students themselves, while at the same time it leaves unquestioned, or it leaves questions around reproduction of inequalities through repeatedly biased and discriminating output untouched. An additional potential effect of the framing of this problem is that using labels such as hallucinations for fabricated and erroneous output could give the impression that the rest of the output is less or not potentially problematic, as we also write in this text that I copied into the slides. So to finish here, because I think my time is running out, what we find is that these three problematizations mostly emphasize matters in terms of symbolic and epistemological issues. And what is invisible then, of course, is the materiality of the technology, the labor necessary for producing and running these systems, importantly also the energy used for this, and questions about ecology. What is the ecological impact when so much more electricity is needed, when more CO2 is produced, when 10 to 50 prompts equal 500 milliliter of water use, depending on your location, etc. So these numbers are quite frightening, I would say. So what we argue is that we also have to look beyond the input of data into these systems, and suggest that universities also include environmental consideration into their policies in the same way they already do when they draft their travel policies or when they decide on their investments. Okay, I think my time is up, so I'll just finish here. Thank you for attending and for the questions that you will have later. I look forward also to the commentary by Professor Amanda Lagerqvist that will be coming up now, I think.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for this interesting paper and the opportunity to respond. And thank you, Emma and Martina, for all the work, MedieKultur and Nord Media Network. So I'm a professor of media and communication studies at Uppsala University. I define myself as a media philosopher, invested in the young conversation of existential media studies, and currently working in a range of projects on AI. And one of the clusters I'm working within is in investigating the relationships between disability, technology, and selfhood, but also in another group of projects, the relationships between AI, the future, and the end of the world, the apocalypse. So, Oliver, this is a very important and welcome analysis of a phenomenon of broad relevance for all of us in the higher education sector. And I will share this with all my colleagues. I sympathize with your conclusions about the need for a social and green or environmental reevaluation in the policy guidelines and for moving beyond these discrete problems, so to speak, of plagiarism, veracity, bias. For me, your paper recalled the digital limit situation we find ourselves in, and especially we found ourselves in when ChatGPT came, and this sense of being thrown into something. And of course, also this sense of a reverse adaptation that I think you cite someone who defines it as a reverse adaptation through this imagined inevitability of the developments. And I think we as academics live and work in a complex time, faced with a big rift, a fracture to our foundation, and a need perhaps to redefine and renegotiate what we are about. Why are we here, as I often say, but also to consider our key priorities. So this is the situation we are in when ChatGPT arrives. So when I consider the searching for how the problem was formulated, it actually struck a passive adoption to a particular worldview, intrinsic to the developments, which is also what you are tracing through your key research questions. I was intrigued then by the consequences related to the embeddedness of these organizations that we are part of in the political economy of the neoliberal university and its techno-progressivism and inevitabilism. And you talk about this on page 15, the hype factor around generative AI and how that played into this. People, or we as organizations, we want to be up to date and cutting edge, and we're also competing with each other, aren't we? That's the meaning of life. So let me provoke. Universities are allowing the discussion to begin somewhere else than in our own professional pride, in our core role, and perhaps also our self-proclaimed interests. So when in conversations last year about ChatGPT in education, I felt we did not often enough return to what founds us. I even wonder if we have lost the ability to articulate core aims and value of our line of work, while we are quickly learning AI literacy. So there's something going on here. So I have questions maybe for you, big ones, but also for everyone, for all of us. So what do the policy responses reveal about our institutions of higher education as agents with a so-called value base? And how does that value base, as all companies have, we are companies, infused with the neoliberal language and objectives, how does it serve us? Has it eroded what we call the axiology of the institution from within? So the only choice that remains is to go along on this inevitable technological trajectory. And at the same time, I find that this neoliberal ideology was never fully integrated into the living organism of teaching, thank God, which is a phronetic praxis. It's about practical wisdom and also relies on open-endedness, judgment, contingency, idealism, critical thinking, the bliss of realizing something, a new insight, the gift of listening to one another. And most academics and teachers still hold this dear. And our calling as researchers is also to explore and ask questions, find new answers or new questions. So I think these are human values that our universities should protect for the sake of our human societies. So for me, the question is also, as it is for you, Oliver, fundamental. Can AI meet such needs? How? Should it even? So my question then, in your eyes, what is lost when we see implementation of large language models in the academy as an engineering problem, something to be fixed, and not as a political problem or even a totalitarian technology, as the philosopher of technology Mark Kirkelberg calls it somewhere? Or as I would call it, as existential media, speaking to our basic and most profound issues and needs, to the question concerning being human in the world with technology. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Amanda, for your comments and for raising these important issues. Because indeed, our analysis could be seen within that larger framework of asking what's happening with our university and what is our role as educators. What does it mean for the way we will be expected to teach? And perhaps, although this is very critical analysis and maybe your questions also suggest some gloominess, perhaps I can reply with some positive or maybe rather optimistic observations, and that is that there is in fact quite a bit of resistance against using and adopting these systems. Last week, survey results were revealed about staff in the University of Copenhagen, where many actually seemed very resistant to this. That we're not really interested. What is the problem that is meant to be solved by these technologies? It's not very clear, but also many students express worries about this. We can see that some students indeed adopt them and use them, but that they are afraid about their creativity. I'm not sure if I included the article in the beginning, but what about development of critical skills if we have to rely on these technologies? What about the assessment of our work? Would that be done not by the teachers, but by some chatbot? What does it mean for the quality of education and for how we are trained? And of course, there's pressure from politicians also in Denmark. Well, there has been so many attacks in the last decades on universities through a repeated series of reforms and all kinds of changes that I don't think are great. But aside from that, you can see that there's pressure to change the way academic universities teach and produce graduates. It's all about employment, the labor market. We have to stick as close as possible. Why do we need theory? These kind of pressures. So I think then this is a perfect tool for them to get the students also closer to these kind of ideals. So I think there's an important task for all of us here to also resist and ask these more critical questions around what do we actually need them for, which kind of systems, because I'm not necessarily saying that all generative AI is bad. Maybe there are systems that have less of an impact on the environment, that are trained on proper data, etc. So we should also not be too negative or throw everything away. But I think important questions need to be asked, and I think we should be quite vocal about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, and thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Martina. And then it's time for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I see that Martina has already done that. So please, Martina.
Thank you so much. And of course, since I've read all your papers, there's so many things I want to say, but I would like to stick to Amanda's question, which I find interesting now, also being in Thailand and being what we call the global south, is that seems to be two obvious reactions. What I call the European way, where we basically ask these questions, being we need to be more critical, what kind of values are there, what happens to the university, how's the labor market, and then we have the response here, and I'm not sure if the University of Singapore has the same reactions, but I've been to Malaysia, I've been different universities in Thailand, I've been to basically here in Southeast Asia, and there's basically the opposite direction. That's like we have to be on it, and this is the future, and we need to prepare our workforce, and everybody is using it. And I think what happens again and again is that I see somehow this split, that the Asian communities kind of think, oh, but you Europeans, you're always so critical and we don't have the opportunities that you have, so that's why we need to use it. While European, probably also in our context of history and where university is coming from, and maybe also the German idea of Humboldt, we also can allow us to take a different stand. And I find these two poles extremely interesting, and I wonder if we kind of just reproducing the same conversations that we basically have had about other things. We just put the label AI on it right now.
Anyone who
Yun, do you want to add something to this? What your experiences are?
Not really a lot from me, but what's quite interesting is, yes, the National University of Singapore actually just came up with a new AI policy for education. Just meaning just about a week or 2 weeks ago. And I think it's not formally implemented yet, because I think in the university, there's loads of discussions going on, discussing the implications of ChatGPT and other stuff for the education. So I got to say, the final guideline is still not almost finalized, but not practically implemented at the moment. But in terms of what the guideline at the moment contains, which I also think will be probably the final guideline, is actually much more about the allowance. So starting from the premise that there's no way we can prohibit students from using them, because this will happen anyway. So we got to understand how this is going to happen. And another thing that's happening across the university at the moment is that we are trying to find ways for the lecturers and professors to incorporate the AI into the teaching, not just for the social science and humanities, but also for natural science and engineering. I'm sure they have their own interesting use of the AI, but I have no idea about it. So when I speak about the use of AI, I'm speaking mostly from the social science department perspective that I belong to. And at the moment, there is a little bit of tension between the actual policy, which is very careful and cautious about the use of the AI and Gen AI especially, and the other university initiative that tries to put forward and encourage the innovative, as they call it, innovative use of the Gen AI in the classroom. So in a way, I'm thinking that one of the ideal scenario they're imagining is find a way to let the students use the AI, but in certain controlled context, rather than giving them too much freedom, rather than being too critical. I think that's kind of the balance they're trying to find at certain points, but clearly it's still an ongoing process on this side of the world as well. And from what I heard, something similar is also happening in several of the English UK universities as well. Not knowing the details, but that's where the current stance is. And another thing that I also wanted to say is I feel loads of these policies about Gen AI are somehow centered around text-based Gen AI, especially ChatGPT, Cloud, and so on. But a lot less has been discussed for visual Gen AIs like Midjourney, which is understandable because ChatGPT, I think, was probably the biggest wake-up call for making all of us to focus on the use of things. But yes, that's generally what's happening at this moment here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if the divide between, let's say, Europe and Global South is necessarily that stark, because also here I notice many colleagues who are jumping on a train and believe this is the future, who use it really a lot for teaching, for their own research. I have a colleague in law who trained his own model, who used it for writing. He gives some prompts for the introduction, and then it writes the rest of the introduction. So some people go really, really far in it, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily geographical or the divide in that respect. But yeah, that's enough. I'm not sure about the time as well. Maybe there's time for another question. I'm not sure.
I guess that needs to be the final words, because we are running out of time. I want to thank you all for this discussion and the great presentation. Please go to the special issue and spread the word. It's open access. We have already here identified many relevant questions to work on, but I guess this special issue will be the starting point for some new rounds. So we hope that both educators, policymakers, other researchers in all the Nordic countries and beyond will read this issue. And we actually have some more food for thought for you. Because our next webinar will be in October. The preliminary date is on October the 15th, and it is about digital life of young people in the Nordics by the Nordic Journal of Youth Research in Norway. You can find the program at nordmedianetwork.org, so please go there and look for the updates. And then I also want to make you aware of one or a couple of resources, but of which the most recent one is about AI literacy. It's about AI, using AI in scholarly writing, editing, and publishing, and it's meant for young scholars, young researchers, or doctoral students who want to critically approach this issue. It's also this series is called Nord Media Network Open Educational Resources, and it's also available online at Nord Media Network. So for now, thank you for our part, and thank you for MedieKultur for collaborating with us this time. And I wish you a nice day and see you at the next webinar. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.